Well, it is a rapidly changing world, as we're all aware, I think. The emphasis and the impact of technology and what it's having on our lives, I suppose, is mind-blowing. We're being introduced to such a new and exciting way of life with the advent of 3D printers, smart TVs, phones-operated security systems, just to name a few areas. In fact, we as humans are really becoming students, being led by unbelievable advancements in technology. Joining me now is a lady who knows all about our future, in some ways, is Shara Evans, who is a futurist, founder and CEO of Market Clarity. Good afternoon to you, Shara.
Hi, Jenny.
Nice to speak to you. I mean, what a lovely insight that you have as to the future of the way we're going to be living our lives.
I must admit, I have great fun looking at cutting-edge and bleeding-edge technologies and extrapolating how they're going to impact our society and businesses over the coming 5, 10, 20 years and beyond.
Well, you know, it's like looking into a crystal ball, really, to most of us, but people like yourself have got access to information of things that we're going to see in the future, I guess, on a fairly regular basis. Is that how it works?
Well, there's not a lot of crystal balling in what I do. There's a lot of strategic planning and looking into research labs and putting together a big picture puzzle of lots of different technologies and looking at scenarios and trying to pick which one is the most likely.
Well, you've got an incredible background, 18 years of running award-winning tech and technical analyst firms over the years. So when you first started 18 years ago, Shara, have things panned out the way you imagined with where we are at this point?
They did. I've actually been in the tech industry for a lot longer than I've been running my own company.
Oh, right.
I'll give you an idea of just one example of a big technology that I called well before anybody else was talking about it. I was very much focused on the telecommunications industry for much of my career, and I was starting to talk about things like packet networks and putting voice over these data networks in the 1990s when packet networks weren't even used in the telco world.
Gosh.
And I predicted things like Skype well before those protocols were actually used. And I remember telling my carrier customers at one stage that all of their voice networks would end up going over their data networks and having them laugh at me and say, there's no way. But, of course, that's exactly what's transpired.
How did you have the insight for that, though?
It was a combination of looking at the technical developments happening in research labs, including some that I was involved with, and looking at the business case for why would companies choose to do this and the many new applications that would become available by implementing this type of technology. Yeah. So it was really a three-pronged approach. Is it feasible, and is there money to be made, and what else can you do with it?
Well, you were spot on there, that's for sure. So we're looking at, all the other areas now that we're dealing with, phones, devices, wearables, which just amaze me with the watches that people have and so on these days. Implantables, sensors, wireless technologies. I'm reading off the information here, if you don't mind. Holograms, augmented reality, virtual reality, and 3D printing. That is a huge area, isn't it?
Humongous. People have no idea of how much can be 3D printed. Even homes are being 3D printed now. Gosh,
that's incredible, isn't it? What I love is the fact that they're able to print out artificial hands for people that have lost a limb of some sort.
Yes, there's an invention called RoboHand, invented by a man in South Africa who was a woodcutter who lost his fingers in an accident, and he decided to design a prosthetic to replace the lost fingers and made it open source and available for anybody to download and print using relatively low-cost 3D printers, and in particular for children, because it's so expensive to have a prosthetic fitted. It's around $10,000, whereas with a 3D printer, you can do it for a cost of a few $100s, and children grow, so you need to do it quite regularly.
It's just wonderful. I'm very excited about these areas of future technology. Are there any areas that you have any concern about?
Well, one of them has to do with driverless cars and robotics, artificial intelligence. Well, there's so much that I could talk to you about where there are potential concerns. Overall, though, Jenny, if I look at emerging technology, my biggest area of concern is that so many different technologies build in security as an afterthought or not at all. And we need to get much better as technologists and as people who take up technology into saying, if somebody can hack into it, do I really want to use this? And even just being aware that there are potential dangers to using things.
Yeah, that's a very good point, isn't it? Because our lives are wide open to the world, really, these days. And when you start looking at the world as it is at the moment and terrorism and that sort of thing, I guess you're right. Security has to be the number one priority.
Yeah, so there's hacking, there's terrorism, there's also identity fraud as well. Yeah. People put all kinds of information about themselves out in the public domain. They put their birth date, put their address of their home, or pictures with GPS coordinates of where they live. And it's so easy to steal your identity if you put too much out there.
Well, that is a very good warning from someone like yourself that certainly knows the future problems that we may have. But there are some great things. Now, you're right about the driverless car. There's got to be some concerns about it. I mean, how do you know if somebody comes out through a red light, for example? Does it pick it up or sensor?
Well, maybe I should backtrack a little bit into what is a driverless car and some of the developments that are happening there so that I'm not starting in the middle of a conversation.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about driverless cars, what we're really talking about, Jenny, are robots. Right. And I think we have this common perception that robots look like humanoids from some science fiction television. But the reality is that they come in all shapes and sizes, and they may very well look like a car. They may look like a humanoid robot. They may look like a drone. They may look like something that is inspired by a biology, like an insect. And they come in lots of shapes and sizes, from very, very large to very, very small. So with driverless cars, the way that they navigate around in the world without human intervention is by using a range of sensing techniques to detect their environment. So I'm talking about things like radar systems that can calculate distances to obstacles, LiDAR systems which generate 3D maps of the car's current environment and help them understand, quote unquote, where they're at in a world. They have motion sensors so that they can tell if the car is moving in a particular direction. And increasingly we're starting to see computer vision systems as well. And these are all inputs into a system that puts this together, uses artificial intelligence, and joins it with other data, such as from Google Maps or from Google Street View or from video cameras that are inside the car, and essentially allows the vehicle to navigate from point A to point B without a human doing anything. So that's a driverless car.
Yeah, it sounds exciting. It sounds wonderful because there are benefits from it, obviously. There'd be a safety angle, road congestion, pollution, industrial you've mentioned here. But are we going to have to see all driverless cars on the road to make it work properly?
No. Well, you mentioned a really good point a few moments ago, Jenny, and that was safety. Yeah. 90% of road accidents are caused by human error right now. Yeah. So one of the reasons that industry and government are really keen on driverless cars is to save lives. Yeah. And also to reduce road congestion and to have, better management of our increasingly crowded urban environments.
Would they be electric cars?
Some of them are, yes. So you have cars like Tesla that are electric. There are a lot of prototypes that are electric cars. Google has a bunch of electric cars and many others, but there'll also continue to be regular gasoline or diesel cars and trucks. Goodness. And it's not just cars. They're industrial driverless vehicles as well that are used in places like mines and ports. A good example that most people probably wouldn't think of when they think driverless car are these huge vehicles used at the Patrick Brisbane Autostrade Terminal in Brizzy that are 60-ton machines that are able to pick up another 60-ton container from a port, 120 tons all up, and move it around autonomously without a human actually doing the driving.
Oh, my goodness me. This is just really right out there, isn't it? How long do you think it'll be before we may see these on the road?
Well, the latest forecasts that I've seen are estimating that we'll see about 10 million of these vehicles worldwide by 2020.
Wow, that's
and
close.
I think, it's only 4 years away.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to start seeing an uptake in the 2020-21 period as manufacturers all across the board start to release what I would call an autopilot mode feature in their top-end models. So you're not going to go into a car dealer and say, I want to buy a driverless car. You'll buy something that looks like advanced cruise control, and you'd probably use it initially on highways at first, and then later, as the technology starts to get more and more robust, you'll start using it in urban areas as well. But by 2025, we're likely to see in the order of 50 million vehicles worldwide, and maybe more. And not only that, but almost every new vehicle will have an autopilot mode that works at least on highways and maybe even everywhere.
Wow.
It gets crazier than that, Jenny. By 2030, I think you won't be able to buy a vehicle that doesn't have an autonomous driving capability. And it may be in that time frame, or perhaps even sooner, that governments will start to legislate the use of autopilot mode, let's say on highways and later on every road.
My gosh.
And so what are people with older model cars going to do? Will they have to trade them in?
Yeah.
Maybe, but I think we're going to see an industry spring up to retrofit late model cars with autonomous capabilities, and that will start to be a new industry in about 2020. And by 2040, our roads will be filled with self-driving vehicles.
This is absolutely amazing to think it's that close. Normally things take forever to get passed through. So what about an accident if it's unavoidable? If you've got a normal car and a driverless and human error interferes, who's guilty?
That is a very difficult ethical question that people are only now starting to think about, and I've been talking about it for a while. And it's not just who gets in the accident and who's to blame, but who's liable for insurance. And heaven help us if someone actually dies, who might go to jail for manslaughter.
Yeah.
So one of the questions would be, is the car really on autopilot, or is it in fact being driven by a human? And one of the ways to make that determination would be to save information about what the car has done, either in storage in the vehicle itself or perhaps up in the cloud somewhere. Mm-hmm. And I think that will start to become important from a forensic perspective. And you might see insurance companies that say, we want you to have some sort of black box type technology in the car, or we're not going to insure that car. But the bigger problem that I see, Jenny, is the ethical question of, if a program is being written to say that a car takes a certain behavior in a certain situation, who makes those ethical decisions? For instance, if somebody trips in front of a car, does the car run over the person, or perhaps jam on the brakes and injure all of the passengers in the car, or hit another car and maybe kill someone in a non-related vehicle? And what happens if different car manufacturers have different rules or programs in each of the different cars? You can imagine how confusing this is.
Is it being talked about already, Shara? Surely it has to be.
Well, some of us in the futurist community are starting to raise these issues, but right now, with respect to driverless car trials, the roboticists and companies involved are really looking at it from the technical perspective of how do we make this work, as opposed to the ethical perspective of what are the things that we have to think of as society to make this work on our highways on a broad basis. And those decisions might vary by different countries depending on the laws of a particular country. But it's a very complex thing that we have to think about.
Very quickly, it seems. Just finally, Shara, what would a cost of a driverless car be compared to today's car, do you think?
Look, it will depend on whether we're talking about prototype or mass production. And what I would imagine is that once we get to mass production, it would be no more expensive than, say, buying a car that has cruise control in it. It will just be part of what you buy.
Incredible.
Today, because the sensors are made in much smaller quantities, then it's going to be more expensive today than a normal car because they're very specialized devices and they're made in very limited numbers.
Yeah, like anything that comes out new, of course, until it becomes mass manufactured. I suppose the car manufacturers today are sort of having to catch on and be on board with all of this, otherwise they'll be left behind.
Well, they're putting a lot of money into driverless vehicles and robotics and starting to do road testing. And they're doing trials just like Google and some of the others. So we've got traditional car companies that are investing here. We've got companies like Google and Baidu, a Chinese company that's a web giant over in China doing driverless car testing. And it will be interesting to see how the social media giants fare against the traditional automakers.
It just is something that we really have to get our head around. You have, of course, but we, the mere mortals, are really finding it hard to grasp how easy it will be. Now we can go out to dinner and have a drink and just say to the car, take me home.
Yeah, well, there's one other implication that I'd like to talk to you about, Jenny, if we have time, and that is, what does it mean for jobs?
Yeah,
because once we start having all of these driverless vehicles around, do we actually need taxi drivers? Do we need a person in the taxi? What happens if you drive a truck for a living?
Yeah.
What happens if you drive a forklift? Is your career coming to an end?
Is it?
Well, not immediately, but I would say the writing is in the walls that starting in 2020, these types of jobs are going to be automated, especially on highways. So for people like taxi drivers that are driving in highly congested areas, that will happen a bit later on, but it's bound to happen. And I think it's prudent for people who are involved in driving to think about, okay, if this is happening, how can I take my business and put a different slant on it? Or is this even the business that I want to be in another 5 or 10 years?
Well, Shara, you know exactly what's going to be happening, and I hope everyone that's involved in that as a career is listening to you, because I think you're spot on there. It's very exciting, I imagine, for all this to happen in our lifetime. It really is. You wonder what 50 years, 100 years' time we're going to be seeing happen.
Oh, I think it's going to look like a science fiction movie.
Yes, I think we're heading that way. We certainly are. That is so interesting, Shara. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Shara Evans, futurist, founder and CEO of Market Clarity. Thank you again, Shara. This is Curtin FM.
Curtin Radio.